Okay, so obviously I love The Dark Tower. I'm a huge fan of Stephen King, and The Dark Tower is his biggest, craziest story ever. It's this creative buffet of King Arthur and Lord of the Rings, the American Western, and sci-fi, stocked with cyborgs and shootouts and haunted houses and actual Spider-Man, and a nutbag villain inspired by Robert Chambers and Robert Fripp. I mean, like I said, I love it. But what makes the series even more fun to me is how over time it drew in King's other stories, heroes and villains, places and concepts, all unifying in the shadow of the tower. Other videos have done a good job summing up those core connections. Check out the Birth Movies Death video I've linked below, and light a candle for Birth Movies Death. But I want to do things a little differently. I want to see how the Dark Tower universe grew over time, specifically how King wove together 13 elements like a seamstress at the loom or a spider at the branch. And I want to share that with you. So please, come along, because I think the journey through the Dark Tower universe is just as cool as the destination. It all starts in 1970. Stephen King attends a screening of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Along with the Robert Browning poem Childe Roland to the Dark Tower Came, it gives him the idea for the Dark Tower, this epic fantasy series about a cowboy knight questing for a mystical nexus of all existence. But the idea seems way too big this soon in his career, so King sets it aside. For now. A few years later, he writes the story of vampires overrunning a small town named Salem's Lot. Among the victims is a priest named Father Callahan. Remember that name. Following that, 2 Salem's Lot short stories. One for the Road explores the fallout from the novel, while Jerusalem's Lot explores the town's origins. Next, in Night Surf, beach-bound teenagers die of a superflu. And in Nona, police jail a teenage psychopath in a small town that King later names Castle Rock. Then survivors of that same superflu from Night Surf battle a wizard named Randall Flagg in the Stand. It's 1978 now, and King, emboldened by his success, releases chapters of The Dark Tower in magazines. The journey's officially begun. But Stephen King immediately returns to Castle Rock and a psychic assassin in the Dead Zone. And then grocery store customers fight off interdimensional monsters in the mist. That dimensional travel will become important. But back in Castle Rock, a St. Bernard terrorizes a mother and child. Then finally, 12 years after inception, King collects and publishes The Dark Tower, the Gunslinger, the first book to follow Roland, a hero who quests through the ruins of Midworld for the title tower. But then King goes back to Castle Rock again for 4 boys and a dead body, and also a truck that roars to hungry life, and also a car that takes supernatural shortcuts. But then King writes The Eyes of the Dragon, a fairy tale that definitely has Flagg from the Stand and might be set in Roland's Midworld too. Put a pin in that. And also put a pin in his Peter Straub collaboration, The Talisman, where the heroes teleport into a fantasy land that also looks like Roland's universe. Anyway, back on Earth, a godlike turtle oversees the final battle with an interdimensional monster in It, which is set in a small town named Derry. And finally, 5 years after The Gunslinger, Stephen King publishes The Drawing of the Three, a sequel that name-checks heroes from The Eyes of the Dragon and Randall Flagg from The Stand, which means the Dark Tower universe isn't just advancing, it's expanding. But then King steps away again for the Tommyknockers, which features a character who makes a supply run through Derry. King also goes back to Castle Rock, where a ghostly pseudonym attacks the author who made him, and also a creepy camera takes pictures of an approaching bloodthirsty dog. Thankfully, King returns to the quest 4 years later as Roland and company journey through the Wastelands, where Roland mentions a godlike turtle named Maturin. Yep, the same turtle from It, which means the tower connects to the turtle and to the town of Derry. And then King returns to Castle Rock again, but this time he's closing shop with Needful Things, the last Castle Rock story, and thank God I was getting kinda sick of it. Fine, It Grows on You tracks a bizarre growing house also in Castle Rock. And back in that other town, an insomniac battles servants of a villain called the Crimson King, a strange creature who has deadly designs for Roland the Gunslinger. Oh, and also a woman escapes an abuser by transporting into Midworld. And 2 novels set in twin dimensions feature an interdimensional beast named Tack. In Everything's Eventual, a company forces a young man to commit psychic assassinations, hang on to that one, because 6 friggin' years after Wastelands, King finally publishes Wizard in Glass. In its pages, Roland sees the sigil of the Crimson King from Insomnia, and King tells us there are only 3 books left to write. Back on Earth, a book-writing widower travels through Derry and Castle Rock, which connects goddamn Castle Rock to the Dark Tower universe that never ends. Next, in Hearts in Atlantis, strange enemies named Lowmen chase after a powerful old psychic, while a rebel girl allies herself with Randall Flagg. And back in Derry, an author finds a supernatural painting with a monstrous car. And right when King feels the urge to return to the tower again, a car strikes him during his daily walk and nearly kills him. Yeah, right, like he'd let that stop him. Doped up on painkillers, King writes a Derry novel that's sort of like Aliens, but if the aliens skipped your chest and popped out of your ass. As King gets better, he and Peter Straub pit the heroes of the Talisman against the Crimson King in Midworld on behalf of captured psychics who are now called Breakers. And he also tosses out another supernatural car story, as a treat. Then King buckles down and focuses. He writes Wolves of the Calla, where Roland and his friends fight alongside Father Callahan, the priest from Salem's lot. See? Told you to remember him. King also gives us a name for his version of interdimensional travel. He calls it going todash. And in 2004, 34 years after first getting the idea, King finally completes his story with Song of Susanna and the Dark Tower. The core connections have been made, the author can rest, the tale is told. But the 13 elements persist, so let's wrap up. Standing stones in a main field struggle to contain a todash monstrosity. A low man retrieves a supernatural kindle. An invisible todash dome cuts off a small town. A pathetic man's wife dies unexceptionally in Castle Rock. A selfish man in Derry strikes a Faustian pact. A time-traveling teacher trying to save JFK stops through Derry. And finally, good lord, finally, we end the journey the way we started, with 3 small-town stories, this time in Castle Rock, but instead of a well-intentioned priest, we get our old buddy Randall Flagg. So, look, I know it can give you a headache trying to sort through all of this, and I try to limit my criteria. But I think there's also a generosity in how King rewards readers by revisiting classic characters, places, and ideas. It's a joy to see Beverly Marsh in 11/22/63, to see Ted Brautigan in the Dark Tower, to see new visions of todash monstrosities, or to see Flagg change from a one-off boogeyman into a comment on cyclical violence. Because sure, the lines and circles here don't reflect the omniscient mastermind who had a grand plan, but I sometimes think grand plans are overrated, and this is something a little cooler, a writer who found his way through, making connections as he discovered them, and in the process, giving us a map of his imagination that we are welcome ourselves to chart and explore.
Imagination, imagination.